Now, this has just been a story that has driven me absolutely nuts here. Larissa Waters, the leader of the Greens, well, she was on Insiders this morning, and she was talking about the situation with this Manchester terrorist incident that we covered on Thursday night here. Terrible incident. 2 people stabbed to death by a crazed terrorist, apparently. Now, this is what she had to say, and I don't know. I feel like you don't need to really qualify a terrorist incident or try and turn it into something else, but have a listen to what Larissa Waters, leader of the Greens, had to say.
2 people were killed, as we mentioned, in that synagogue attack in Manchester the other day, on the holiest day on the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur. What was your reaction to this, and has it changed your view at all about the danger and the threat posed by anti-Semitism?
No violence anywhere is acceptable, and this is exactly why we need a resolution that is based on self-determination, and why Australia should have, 2 years ago, imposed serious sanctions on the Israeli government, who have been conducting a genocide.
Sorry to butt in, but I am asking you about anti-Semitism and the fatal attack we saw in a synagogue in Manchester.
And we've condemned, and we have condemned that.
Are more steps needed here to prevent a similar incident here?
Well, look, of course we have condemned that, and as I said, our hearts go out to those families. Violence on any basis is not acceptable, and we need to have social cohesion, and part of that is Australia doing what's necessary to stand up for humanitarian justice, and that's why we need those sanctions, and that's why we've got to stop selling weapons components.
And that right there is why the Greens got absolutely pantsed at the last election, because they went from being a party of environmental concerns to meddling in the Middle East. Deputy Executive Director of the IPA, Daniel Wild, how is it that they managed to get from, hey, you've had a terrorist attack in England, that's bad, to, well, it's probably Israel's fault because, you know, they're fighting this war, and it might be our fault too because we're providing weapons components or helping them, or, you know, haven't completely cut them loose. How sick is this, Daniel?
Yeah, well, that's Greens logic for you. That's called victim blaming. And I think it tells you everything you need to know about the Greens. It's hardly a surprise. As you said, they went backwards at the last election. They've got no lower house members, partly for this reason. And look, I suspect a part of this is, you know, there was a period of time where, for a lot of younger people, I think it was seen as being a little bit cool to support Palestine. It was a little bit anti-establishment, a bit edgy. But I think what they see now is that all of this is very fake. Larissa Waters is very fake. Greta Thunberg's very fake. She's just a mouthpiece for whatever powers that be are putting her in those situations. So I think that what we've seen now is really the high watermark for the Greens, and they're starting to dissipate. They're certainly going to struggle not having any lower house members and the loss of infrastructure that comes with that. So, look, I think Larissa Waters is a bit out of her depth here as well. So, you know, let's hope this is the beginning of the end of the Greens as a discernible national political force.
Larissa Waters out of her depth, Daniel Wild. I love the pun work there. That's very, very good. I like that. But Lee Hansen, let me get your take on this too, though, because, you know, she talks about social cohesion, and yet the Greens are the ones who are very much identified with the pro-Palestine cause. And you see associated with that an awful lot of messages that are very anti-social cohesion, including calls to globalize the Intifada, which, when you take it quite literally, is exactly what you got in Manchester the other night.
Yeah, correct. Look, the Greens are leading the division and hate in regards to this argument. Larissa's comments were completely uncalled for and unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. And yes, I do think she should apologise. The fact that you've got a leader of a political party here in Australia who's meant to be a role model and a leader, basically implying that is the Jewish community's fault for the terrible and heinous incident that happened in the UK. Now, all this is doing is creating more division, more hate, more anti-protest rallies, more advocating for pro-Palestine, which again is creating division. So I'm really struggling to understand how this argument can continue from the Greens, you know, you only have to read the comments online from people, as you say, Dan, the younger members of the community who think it's cool or hip that really have got on board. If you read the commentary or read the sentiments, majority of them actually have no idea what they are following, the history or the understanding. They follow the pure narrative. So Larissa has simply added to this hate and division, and yes, it's unacceptable, and I think she needs to apologise, pure and simple.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that that's a start to it, but you do have this bigger problem, as you've both mentioned. You've got these younger people particularly, but I'll tell you what, you look at some of the crowds and you see a lot of oldies out there too, maybe some of the old knitting nanas who've gone and turned into pro-Palestine protesters. One thing that I'm really concerned about here, and I want both of your help to get me through this issue, because on the one hand, you know, I'm a big free speech guy, but on the other hand, I am so sick of these protests turning Sydney into Melbourne or even Paris. You know, we see this across Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, everywhere in this country, these protests for Palestine over and over again. Now, on Monday night, on the eve of the anniversary of the October 7th heinous terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel, well, you've got this vigil for Gaza, 2 years of genocide at Sydney Town Hall by the Palestine Action Group. Daniel Wild, how do we square the circle of free speech and letting people go and have their say, even if what they are saying is really dumb and idiotic, but at the same time, you know, they do have free speech because it's a free country? How do we square this?
Yeah, it's a great question, James, and I share your view. I'm very much in the camp of we should allow as much free speech as possible, and we should allow people to undertake demonstrations as much as they want to, as far as possible in our country, even though I disagree with all of this. I think where the line is firstly when it's repeated, when it's becoming day after day or week after week and becoming highly disruptive. What that means is you've had the opportunity to have your say, you've had an opportunity to peacefully assemble, as is your right, but you don't have a right to disrupt people's life day after day, week after week, which is what's been happening in Melbourne. I also think in Sydney you've had situations where these global icons with Sydney Opera House and the Sydney Harbour Bridge have been commandeered for these, you know, very hateful protests. The problem with that is it reflects poorly on our nation as a whole. I mean, everybody around the world knows the Opera House, they know the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I would have thought that there are other places where these demonstrations could take place as well. And then the other point I would say is when you're getting close to incitement, when you're intimidating and bullying people and making people feel incredibly unsafe in their own community, then a line needs to be drawn there. And I think that, you know, basically that's where we are with a lot of these protests.
Well, yeah, and Lee, I want to ask you about this too, because I think that there is a way forward on this. If you say, well, you can demonstrate, but there are certain places where there's just simply an exclusion no-go zone. And in Sydney, that should absolutely be the Opera House. But one thing we saw 2 years ago was the cops were not willing to go and have the fight. Do we need more robust policing to stand up to some of these groups that may, you know, want to use force but can't be allowed to determine where and when they are allowed to march?
Yeah, I agree. Look, I agree with both your comments. To the point where these protests keep happening time and time again, and now it's under the guise of a vigil. Rubbish. We know what it's actually about, and don't put it under false pretenses of vigil. But the police need to be enabled to enforce the law and do their job. These repeated protests should not be happening at key landmarks. They should not be interrupting people's day of lives. The cost to the government, the cost to the taxpayer that is happening over and over and over again, it needs to stop. So yes, there needs to be greater restrictions put in place, and I totally agree with you, Dan, when it reaches the point where it's inciting hatred towards any other group that they feel unsafe, then this is where the law needs to be enforced. So absolutely support that in every way, shape or form. The public have had enough. You know,
Absolutely.
we're sick of seeing these protests. We're sick to death of seeing the signs and the hatreds, and then it leads to the burning of the Australian flag, you know, and against the Australian way of life, and we have this vicious cycle that's going around. How is this conducive or helpful to us and our issues and our primary way of life here in Australia? I do not see that. So yes, it is a balance. You need to have free speech, absolutely, but do it in the right place, at the right time, without the constant negative impact on the community and the detriment to the taxpayer. If they want to do it, they go out and fund it. They should pay for the times and the wages for the police to come
100%.
and keep it a safe environment.
100%.
So, enough. They should get the bill.
I can tell you that in New South Wales, the cops have spent millions and millions and millions of dollars in overtime policing these chuckleheads here. And, you know, I find it so ironic that so many of the people you see out there are good, nice, liberal, tolerant people who are marching essentially in favor of theocratic terrorism. I just find that so bizarre. But I got some special news here, too. Don't forget that you can see a special documentary investigating the rise of anti-Semitism here on Sky News Australia this Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m.